Although there's so much focus on the federal politics of the upcoming November 5th election, there are a lot of other items on your ballot that are just as important. The local elections. But despite these races having huge effects on our lives as Austin residents, they're often overlooked, and information on them is harder to come by. I sat down with Valerie DeVille to find out more about them.
Well, we grew out of the suffrage movement. Basically, when women got the right, well, white women got the right to vote in 1919. All of those folks who'd worked for almost a century to do this, like, needed something else to do with their time, and so they kind of got together, and all of those disparate suffrage groups formed the League of Women Voters nationally, and with the intent of, now that we have all these newly enfranchised voters, what can we do to make sure that they're informed, that they know their rights, that they know, like, what to do, what's expected of them when they go vote, all of that. And so, from that, we get our is it our mission statement? I think it's our mission statement. But empowering voters, defending democracy, and that sums up pretty much what we do. We have we have our voters guide, which is how most folks are familiar with us. We also do candidate forums. We've been doing those we just had the mayoral one last night for the city of Austin. We put out, a lot of information, like, once the deadline is over for voter registration, we will still be in a lot of the places where we've been doing voter registration, but we'll be doing information instead, informing people of, like, what do you do if you moved here from a different state after the deadline? How do you go about voting if that's the case? That sort of thing. And also, we'll have the voters guides available, and just making information available so people feel more equipped when they go vote. Well, one, you have this, like, for example, if you have 200 people who vote at a polling location on a given day, 200 of them are going to vote for president because that's what comes first on the ballot. And so that's the one you see. And, 195 of them will vote for Senate. But every time you go down the list, more and more people drop off. And so by the time you get to Austin ISD and, ballot propositions and, district attorney and things like that, you might have 100 people left. You might have 75 people who bother to go all the way down. So not only, one, is your vote a bigger percentage of the whole, even if you're, voting for president versus voting for the local, but also the fact that most people don't make it all the way down to the bottom of the ballot means that you even have more outsized influence than you would in the higher up races. So basically, the closer it is to your door, kind of the more voice you have, but it's also, that's what affects you every day. When we talk to high school students, we tell them, like, the school board decides your dress code and what you eat in the cafeteria and, like, what your class schedules are and what books are in the library, all of that stuff. And so you have a voice in that. It affects you every day. And if you are a voter, you have the ability to, like, call somebody who represents you and say, hi, I'm a voter who you represent, and this is my opinion, and they take you more seriously. Another thing that I think is discouraging to voters a lot of the time is, for example, Texas leans Republican very heavily in the results. Travis County, on the other hand, leans very Democratic in the results, to the point where there's a lot of offices that end up unopposed at the local level. And you have many counties that lean the other direction, where folks vote in the opposite party's primary than the one they actually belong to, because that's the only way they get to choose their local officials. And so, because they always run unopposed, or they know that their candidate's going to lose in November, so they try to pick the one that's most like what they want. But if you actually vote for the candidate that you want in November, even if you know they're going to lose, that sends a message up the chain to all the people who pay money to elect people, between the state party and the national party and donors. The more viable a candidate is for an office, the more competitive an office is, the more you're going to have somebody actually run for it. And so if you want to have choices on your ballot, the way to make that happen is to vote even if you know you're not going to win. Well, the voter's guide, we've been doing it for a very long time. The way that it works is we have committees that come up with questions for everybody who's running for a given office. So, for example, everyone who's running for constable will get the same 5 questions. The first of which is almost always, what makes you think you're qualified to do this job, essentially. But the other 4 we try to make those not really gotcha questions, but things that matter right now. So, for example, I use law enforcement as this example a lot because one of the questions that we asked was about use of force training, de-escalation, that sort of thing, because that is a conversation the community is having right now, and that's something that people want to know the answers to. And so we get the answers back from them. We give them about a month to get back to us, and we prod them a couple times to make sure that they don't forget. And then we just print what they write verbatim. We don't edit it. If they don't know how to use a comma properly, you will know about it. The only changes that we do make is one, we have a character limit, so we will cut them off if they go over. But we also translate into Spanish, Vietnamese, and simplified Chinese here in Austin. Different leagues have different languages that they translate into. And so we do have translators for that. So if you're reading the simplified Chinese version, you're probably not getting any idiomatic phrases and things like that are not going to translate clearly. But for the most part, we're trying not to touch it. We're trying to give you what they said. And so it gives you the opportunity to compare really apples to apples. They're answering the exact same question. They have time to think about it. They've got all this time to write it down. And we just print what they write. The Austin Chronicle will have a print copy of it this October 10th. October 10th. The print guides will be available October 11th. That's when we distribute them to libraries and community centers and anybody basically who wants to have a stack of them to give away. That is when we receive the bulk of the print run. And then the online versions, you can go to League of Women Voters Austin website or the state website, and you can download a PDF of the voter's guide for whatever area you want. And if you go to Vote 411, which can be .org or .com or any number of other things that redirect, but basically vote411.org, and you put in your address, it will actually show you all of the races and all of the issues that are going to be on your ballot for your address. And then you can go through, it has links to the candidate's social media. It has, for like propositions, we have pros and cons. We have simplified language for a lot of them because many of them have, 3 double negatives in them, and it's hard to parse what exactly it's going to do. So we try to have plain language explainers. But all of this is done by volunteers, so a lot of it has to do with like what volunteer bandwidth we have, how much we can do that. But it lets you go through and you can basically check who it is that you've decided you're going to vote for in a given way, and then you can print it out because you can't use an electronic device within 100 feet of a polling machine in Texas. You can have your phone in your pocket, but you can't pull it out and use it as a guide. But you can take printed materials as long as you're not waving them around and trying to push them on other people. And you take them with you when you leave. So you can take the printed copy of the voter's guide. You can take that printed out PDF. You can write it on your arm. You can make your own personal notes, or you can print out from Vote 411 and take that with you so that you know who it is that you've already decided to choose, instead of having to try to remember it all. There's several city council seats and the mayor that are up for election or re-election, depending. And those are nonpartisan races, so they can be a little bit harder to parse because you don't have a D or an R or an L or a G or something next to their names. And those are the things most likely to end up in a runoff because there are so many candidates, nobody's going to get a majority. It's easy for someone to not get a majority. But we were going to have a bunch of City of Austin propositions, but those wound up being canceled at the last minute. So if you heard about, 13 things to amend the city charter, those are not happening this November. They may show up again next year, but they're not this year. But we do have, Travis County has a proposition to basically subsidize childcare, either via businesses or via individuals. There will be a fund that you can access to help you cover your childcare costs. And that is on the ballot. It's probably the one that affects most people, in this area. It's difficult when you talk about the littler municipalities. You got your Westlakes and your Pflugervilles and things like that because everything is so very, very localized. And those really, I would recommend going to the voter's guide for because I can't keep that all in my brain. But yeah, the big ones are city council, and then that Travis County proposition I think is really going to be very important. The one thing is, if you're in Travis County, you can go to votetravis.com and look yourself up. All it requires is your name, first name, last name, and date of birth. And once you've looked yourself up, you can make sure that your address is correct and that you are not in suspense. If you're in suspense, you can still vote. But when you go vote, they will say, do you still live on Main Street? And you say, no, I live on First Street now. And they'll update it, but you'll be voting based on your Main Street address, not your new address. So that's the reason we encourage people to update before the deadline, because that way you'll be voting where you actually live now. But it doesn't mean you can't vote. But then when you go down a little bit below that, there will be a sample ballot button, and you can actually click that, and it will show you what your ballot will look like. It will show you all the stuff for your specific ballot. That is live as of this morning. I checked it myself, so it is happening now. And the main thing is that becomes an obstacle is if you have moved from one county to another. That requires you to do a very specific procedure that has to be done during early voting, and it's way too complicated to get into. But if that is something that affects you, you've moved counties and you haven't updated before October 7th, call your local county and find out what you need to do, because they'll be able to walk you through it, but it has to be during early voting. Don't wait till election day. Well, the number one thing is that we expect a huge turnout this election. So you want to make sure that you're not stuck at the last minute standing in line for 14 hours on election day because you forgot about it until the last minute. So what I would recommend is, one, vote early. Not on the first day of early voting. That's usually the busiest day of early voting, the first day and the last day. October 21st through November 1st, you can early vote. That includes one weekend in the middle. It's a Monday through a Friday. When on the day that you plan to go vote, you can go to votetravis.com, and there will be a map that is color-coded based on how long the lines are. So you can hopefully find somewhere to vote that you don't have to stand in line for a really long time. The closer we get to election day, the fewer locations are going to be that way. But you can vote anywhere in Travis County, even on election day. And every county that touches Travis County now has countywide polling. So if you're in Bastrop or Blanco or Williamson or Hayes, those all have countywide polling now. So you can go anywhere in the county, even on election day. And many of them also have their own systems for gauging how long the lines are that you can check out at their websites. So that's number one, is just figure out what day you're going to vote, and try to make it so that it's not your last opportunity to do so if something goes wrong. Vote that first week of early voting, and then if something goes wrong, you get a flat tire or whatever, you have 10 more days that you can still handle it. The other thing is, as I mentioned earlier, take some notes with you. Don't rely on yourself to remember everything that's going to be on the ballot, because there's a lot. Some places more than others. And with the nonpartisan races, it's even harder because, again, there might be multiple candidates, 5 or 6 on some of these races. And they don't have any kind of partisan guide for you that lets you know what party they're aligned with. So you can't just go by, well, this is how I always vote. You have to remember who it actually is. So, having some preparation for that is always important too. And then, have a backup plan. If what do you do if you get a flat tire and it's election day and you haven't voted yet? Figure that sort of thing out too. Well, we've been dealing with a whole lot of culture issues the last couple of sessions of the legislature. And I think that those affect more people than they think it does. More people are affected by it than think it affects them, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because there's always these unintended consequences that happen when they pass bills like this. One of the things that we brought up, in the when they were talking about, banning drag performances was if I wear pants on stage, am I presenting as male? What defines, that? And so, that's a legitimate thing to be worried about. That there, even bills that don't seem like they would affect you could possibly affect you. And so the folks who make those decisions, the ones who are doing all of this stuff, it will impact the community whether you realize it or not. And we don't know what's planned for, future sessions. So yeah, that's probably the big one. And then the other one is, if you vote, you're invested. And, I've told this story several times now, but I like hockey. I watch hockey when it's on TV. I used to play hockey when I was younger and fitter. But the only time I ever knew like everybody's stats was the year I played fantasy hockey, because I had an investment in knowing what every goalie save percentage was and what everybody's win, lose, and ties, stats were, and what all, who played what position in every team and who got traded and all that, because I had an investment in it. I couldn't tell you most of that stuff now because I'm not paying that close of attention because I'm not invested. So just by voting, you invest yourself in the system because you're paying some attention.
Now it's your turn. Go to vote411.org to double check your voter registration, figure out what's on your ballot, and make sure you know what you're voting for.